KPIs, benchmarks, quotes, enough already. My top-notch sales team is hitting a rough patch, and morale's plummeted. We've thrown everything at it. Meetings, brainstorms, training, but it's like we're spinning our wheels. How can I get our team excited about sales again?
Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Stein, a clinical psychologist, emotional intelligence expert, and founder of MHS, a leading publisher of scientific psychological assessments and talent development solutions. If you're dealing with an unmotivated team, well, don't worry, it's not game over yet. Get ready to level up your office, because today's episode is all about gamification. I think it's safe to say that if given the choice between heading to the office or embarking on a virtual adventure to save a princess trapped in a castle, well, most of us would opt for the latter without a second thought. But what if we could merge the excitement of gaming with the responsibilities of work? Imagine if every task felt like a level to conquer, and with every achievement, you're unlocking a new skill. That's the power of gamification in the workplace. It's not just about making work more enjoyable, it's about tapping into intrinsic motivators to boost employee engagement, drive performance, and ultimately enhance productivity. So how do we bring this concept of gamification into our professional environments? Today we're diving deep into this topic with one of the pioneers in this field, Yu-kai Chou. As the co-founder of the Octalysis group, author and international keynote speaker on gamification and behavioral design, Yu-kai is an expert in helping organizations like yours level up your teams. Hello, Yu-kai. It's great to meet you here today. We're going to be talking about gamification, and as one of the pioneers in this area, I'm sure you have a lot to share with our listeners. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with Octalysis Prime and what got you interested in this whole area.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. I got into the gamification world in 2003, so more than 20 years ago now. At the time, I was in high school and I invested thousands of hours into playing games, leveling up my character, becoming stronger, accumulating gold in the game. And at one point, I stopped playing this game called Diablo 2. And I was in a transitional period between quitting one game and finding the next game. And I felt really empty. I thought I spent so much energy making my in-game character amazing. But in the real world, I was just the same loser, getting nowhere. So I just thought, how can we create a game where the more hours we spend on it, the better our real lives are? And how can we make just things we have to do in the real world more interesting, exciting, like a game? So I started seeing my life as a game, and I started various companies first year in college. This was in 2004. Eventually, it grew into many other things, wrote a book called Actionable Gamification, and shared a lot of this knowledge at places like Stanford, Harvard, Yale, IDEO, Google, Lego, a variety of places. And almost done with my second book, by the way. So Octalysis Prime, that you mentioned, is one of the three companies I'm running, and that's the education platform to teach people about the Octalysis framework that I created. It's called the Octalysis because it's the combination between octagon and analysis. And I've made over about 1,400 videos on the Octalysis Prime platform, about 10 minutes each. And then besides that, I have a consulting company called the Octalysis Group.
That's pretty amazing. So you've been doing this for 20 years. Wow, that's incredible. So gamification obviously has been around for a while. A lot of the people who listen to this podcast may not be very familiar with what gamification is. So why don't you just give us a brief explanation of what it means? What is gamification?
Gamification is applying what we call game elements into non-game contexts. So things that are supposedly boring, but important things we have to do, we don't want to do. Now, a lot of people misunderstand it like saying, oh, it's about creating games, making a bunch of games. And that's not true. It's about making important activities more enjoyable and more fun, like a game. You add more creativity and self-expression to those activities, more social influence, more delightful surprises and progression towards a win state or a higher status. And we integrate those game elements into normal activities, so all these activities itself become enjoyable.
So one of the controversies in this area that people talk about is whether spending a lot of time on playing these games or being on computers generally is good for your sort of social connections? You mentioned earlier that it was taking you away from social interaction, or does it actually enhance your ability to be social with others? Can you speak to that a bit? Like, how do you see it helping us be more socialized?
Yeah, so first there's a clarification between games versus gamification. Now, gamification is not necessarily being on a computer all day or playing these games all day. Like, again, it's like eating carrots is fun now, or exercising or building relationships. We have projects about gamifying safety in factories so less people get injured, or driving safely. So if you look at gamification, it's the more time you spend on it, the more results get generated from it. So that's generally, as long as it's designed with good intent, usually it creates very positive results. Now, you might be asking about games itself, because that's what I spent a lot of time in 2003. And it really depends on the type of game you're playing. And they did some studies. They had a bunch of kids play strategy games like StarCraft for a week. And then after, they did some tests, and these kids were more thinking strategically. They were more creative in the way they process things. But then have a different group of kids play more social games like The Sims. And they saw that after the time of playing the game, they were more sociable and interacting with others with more kindness and whatnot.
That's fascinating. So one of the areas that we work in and we're really interested in is emotional intelligence. And that has to do with people becoming more self-aware, being more empathic, improving their social skills. Can you walk us through how gamification can help us in one of these areas, one of these interpersonal kinds of areas?
Yeah, so I'll say that games are really just simulations. I think there's a reason why games usually fit into a variety of genres. At the beginning, it's all about fighting games, and then you have some socializing games like Farmville or making friends or whatnot. And then you also have puzzle or civilization building kind of games. There's a lot of study about why do we play? And play is about practicing what's important to thrive in the real world, right? In primitive times, and this happens with other animals too, they like to play. And what do they play? They play fighting with each other, right? And the reason is because you don't want your first fight to be of life or death, right? You want to have experience sparring with people and enjoying it, understanding what are mistakes, learning from it, and growing from it. And there's a lot of social games, which of course, being sociable, interacting, sharing, growing together, teamwork, that helps with building a village, coming together, surviving as a pack. So that helps with survival. And then also the puzzle or civilization building games allows us to figure out how to build society in a sense. So honestly, the reason why I think our brains are attached to these things is because of survival. The reason why humans think it's funny when other people do stupid things and they hurt themselves, right? A lot of funny videos online are just people doing silly things and end up hurting themselves. Like, why is it funny? It's morbid to just enjoy that. And I believe it's our brain telling us, hey, you got to pay attention to this, right? This is important. You want to look at it and make sure you don't make the same mistake. And it's so enjoyable, you should tell all your friends about it so they will learn from the same mistake. So that, in a sense, is the philosophy of gamification. It could try to painfully nail it into your brain with discipline, or it just makes it enjoyable. You think it's funny, so you pay attention and you tell people about it. And now, when it comes to simulation, right, an environment, when you look at a game, what is a game? A game is a goal, and you have your current resources, and there's obstacles between you and the goal, right? So you have to figure out how to use your current resources to overcome the obstacles and reach your goal. And that, in fact, is much closer to work in the real world, right? Compared to things we do in school, most of the time, the jobs we do isn't about memorizing a bunch of things and regurgitating on a piece of paper. It's about problem solving, overcoming obstacles. When you play a game that has team dynamics, right? It's a group of people using their own different talents and resources to overcome those obstacles to reach the win state and hit the goal, right? And through that, you will learn how to build chemistry, how to interact with each other, how to deal with loss, right? A lot of people, they haven't dealt with loss until it's too late, right? They're facing a very important project in your life and you're frustrated and you don't know how to cope with it. But if you play games a lot, and let's say even socially, play games with people that you consider less talented or more talented than you, and you're dealing with that frustration or miscommunication, you understand how to interact with it and you know how to climb out of failure more often. So I think it's a very strong thing to have people experience these things together to build these team dynamics and increase emotional intelligence.
That's great. Now I think I'm beginning to understand why my grandson spends so much time online with his friends building all these societies and civilizations. You mentioned workplace. Can we take this and look at how it applies to the workplace? What benefits have you seen in introducing gamification?
First, we start with a hypothetical, and then we go into an actual example case study. So imagine everyone in the company actually enjoyed doing their work, right? They love doing what they do, and they constantly want to get better, and teamwork in a very collaborative, positive way, and they know each other's strength and weakness. Like, when that happens, I don't think anyone would argue, well, yeah, the company is not stronger, performing better, less turnover rate, and just overall just a better company. And everyone wins, right? Customer will win because service and the quality of the product is better, value proposition is better. The company wins because they make more money and have less employees leave. And employees win because they're happy at the place they work. I'm going to start with just less technology, just more philosophy about how these gameplay and ideas go into the workplace. And then we'll go into an actual gamification implementation that require technology and whatnot. So one simple example is when Google started in the early days, the Google founders, they thought about, hey, every engineer, every employee who works at Google is either an entrepreneur or either wants to be an entrepreneur. So just because we pay them doesn't mean that they want to keep doing work and staying here. And so they're like, okay, how do we design an environment that's fun and meaningful so we ourselves would want to work here? This kind of connects to my Octalysis framework, where we break down 8 core drives of human motivation. So I'll tell you the first 3 because it's relevant here. So the first is epic, meaning, and calling, doing something bigger than yourself. Number 2 is development, accomplishment, feeling a sense of progression and achievement, leveling up. And the third one is empowerment of creativity and feedback, which is using your creativity and seeing feedback, adjusting strategy, style of play, all that stuff. What the Google founders decided to do is, number 1, they wanted to have epic, meaning, and calling in their company. So they said, hey, Google does 2 things. Number 1, we organize the world's information. And number 2, we do no evil. So there are a lot of engineers who start saying, well, I can get a paycheck anywhere, but at Google, I feel like I'm changing the world. That's important for me. And that's what in games, you're always saving the world as opposed to just doing a mundane job. Core drive 2 is development accomplishment. Now, not every engineer can become a manager, but everyone wants to feel a sense of progression and get leveling up. At the beginning, had 6 levels of engineers, and so you start with a level 1 engineer to level up to level 2 engineer, level 3, level 4. So you don't ever have to go in to become a manager, but you can continue to feel like you're progressing, leveling up in your workplace. And then core drive 3 is empowerment of creating feedback. And a lot of people I talk to companies, they say they have this brilliant idea, they talk to their boss about it and it gets shut down, and it feels very demotivating, and so they leave and start their own company, right? Because they really want to test out their ideas. So Google at the beginning had this thing called 20% rule, which is basically saying for 1 day of the week, you can work on anything you want as long as the IP belongs to Google. And so a lot of people, these quote unquote entrepreneurs, like, oh, it's so much work starting a new company. So why don't I just be creative and do this stuff within the safety walls of Google? At the time, 50% of the products came out of this 20% time. And it includes some big success like Gmail and Google News, things we still use today. So that's just an idea of just how do we implement more fun, interesting elements and games into your workplace.
Encouraging creativity can bring so much to your office. Like Yu-kai mentioned, it can lead to more innovative ideas, more collaboration, and get people really excited to come to work each day. There are a ton of ways to do this, but the most important method is the one that's built around your team's preferences and personalities. This is where tools like the Peerman, Change Style Indicator, Influence Style Indicator really come in handy. They provide data that help you understand how your employees prefer to learn, how they adapt to change, and how they approach decision making. This can be extremely helpful when building your gamification strategy. And these methods can make a huge difference in your office.
Now, then I moved to an example of an actual case study. And this is actually interesting. This is for a Brazilian bank called Caixa Econômica Federal. They were the number 2 largest public bank in Brazil. And so my company didn't do this directly, but it's through one of my students, Ricardo, from this company called Funny Fire. So, and they applied my Octalysis framework into this bank. And so what they want to do is they wanted to see if gamification could motivate their 77,000 employees across 4,500 branches, serving 88 million customers. And they want to see if they can increase reoccurring profits by 5%. So what Funny Fire did for them is they connected every employee's KPI activities to a game engine where as you do KPI activities, you'll get a card, and the card could be 1/4 of a coffee maker or 1/8 of a TV or whatnot. And if you collect all the parts, you will get the actual coffee maker TV. So people starting to feel like, wow, this is so interesting as I do my work. There's a little bit of collection set design. There's a little bit of that slot machine mechanic to see what cards I get. And then you can get an ultimate reward. So in fact, again, their goal was to just increase 5% in annual sales. They actually increased it by 49% in 6 months, which actually became more than $1 billion a year in revenue. Because of that, Caixa actually went from the number 2 public bank to the number 1 public bank in Brazil. So this is just an example when people feel like doing their work is more fun, more rewarding, more exciting. You obviously then you get more results as a company.
That's pretty incredible. Those are amazing results. So it sounds like you're really engaging your employees in the process. And I guess the thing that I wondered about is you're engaging them in the right direction, right? You're getting them to achieve their goals and to make a more profitable company, which is incredible results. One question would be, how do you introduce gamification into an organization? What are your first steps of introducing this?
Introducing gamification in an organization evolved over time. Some companies, they still have this stigma that's, oh, why are we getting our employees to play games? All right, we're an enterprise software company or we're a bank, so they shouldn't be playing games. And they're grown-ups, they don't need to play games. Now, first of all, again, the generation of gamers have grown, right? And so people below even 45 years old now have pretty much grown up playing a variety of video games. And then there's a variety of case studies. So if you say, hey, did you know SAP used gamification and they increased their core business metrics by more than 200%? So again, then a lot of them will say, oh, wow, SAP is like the top company in enterprise software, right? They're what we want to grow up to become like one day. So who are we to say that we're too serious for it? And so I think with these case studies out there, it's much easier to convince them. So number one, we make sure that they see the value. It's not just for fun. It's not a gimmick. There's actually a return on an investment. Companies can make money because employees want to do their work well. And then you explain like the how. Hey, this is all based on behavioral science, based on how the brain works. So this methodology is sound also. And then you get to the layer of, okay, your employees would actually enjoy doing their work. And so you'll have a nicer culture also.
So you have this leader and you convince them that their profits are going to skyrocket as a result of this and get them all enthused and they're ready to start. When you start with the leader, are there any kind of warning signs or things you want them to be aware of before they actually implement this on a small scale?
Some big ones we talk about is people relying too much on extrinsic motivation. So just give a reward on everything you want them to do. And what happens is then people overly rely on the reward itself, the extrinsic reward, as opposed to the intrinsic joy of doing it. That's why we talk about, again, the 8 core drives. You want to rely on the left brain core drives, which are 3 of the core drives, which are extrinsic motivation, as opposed to what we call the right brain core drives that deal with intrinsic motivation to make it more enjoyable. So that's why instead of just giving people reward, we want to make it more social. We want to give them more strategy. We want to make it more unpredictable. There's more curiosity in it. And when you can do that, then the task becomes enjoyable as opposed to, hey, if the reward gets stale or you no longer give me such a big bonus, then I just check out. I don't want to do it anymore. And then some projects, companies want to use what we call a black hat strategy, which basically drives more adrenaline, excitement. People are on overdrive, but they could potentially burn out. So there's high engagement, high intensity. And then there's what we call white hat motivation strategies, which people feel like, hey, it's sustainable, it feels comfortable, I feel in control, but there's no urgency. So it's more of a long-term kind of people feel happy in terms of quality of life. But if you just measure like 1 month results, you may or may not see as drastic of a difference. So there's a lot of these things people have to be aware of, at least to understand that not all behavior is equal. Even if people are doing the activity now, it doesn't mean that they'll keep doing or they enjoy doing it. So those are some warning signs.
Do you find any difference in terms of the employees? Maybe you mentioned right brain, left brain. So some employees that are more cognitively rational focused versus those that are more emotionally focused. Do you see any difference in how employees take to the gamification process?
We have a 5-step design process, and the first step and the second mini step within is defining your player type. So we'll draw 2 by 2 and have 4 different player types and analyze their motivation profile and whatnot. And so definitely we'll look at how the different core drives motivated different people more or less. But generally speaking, everyone is motivated by these 8 core drives to some certain extent. It's like saying everyone wants to feel competent and appreciated, right? No one wants to feel incompetent and unappreciated. So there are things that we know, hey, if we can increase those things, we can make people feel a stronger sense of accomplishment and growth and being appreciated and having more empowerment of an agency. We know that they'll like it more. And if anything, it's not going to demotivate them, right? At most, if the design is not the best, at least it's, I'm indifferent to it, but it doesn't demotivate them. So we would think about, okay, what is the best strategy with these 8 core drives to do at the right time for the right type of people? And interestingly, because a lot of people ask about this generation things, like a lot of clients or companies will invite us in and say, hey, we have like a Gen Y problem, millennial, Gen Z problem, so we need gamification. And actually through our experience and research, we see that the older generation, baby boomers actually respond better to gamification as long as they don't know it's called gamification, because sometimes they still have that stigma. And there's a reason for that. It's because the older generation, they didn't grow up with all the stimuli, right? It's about hard work, perseverance, and really getting things done. But when they're actually in an environment where, again, you feel like there's a sense of purpose and meaning to your work, there's a sense of progress and path that makes sense for your growth, there's a sense of meaningful choices, the compensation makes sense based on your actual performance activity, and you feel appreciated, they just like that environment even more. Now, for the younger generation, it's actually different because these kids, they grew up with all these core drives. Like every game they're playing, they're saving the world. They go to a chess tournament, they're number 72, they get a medal. And so when they go into a work environment and they see gamification strategies, they'll be like, oh, wow, this is interesting, but it's nothing compared to the game I play. So you actually need better gamification design skills to engage the younger generation.
So you mentioned you have a new book coming out, and in that book, you talk about 6 steps that'll help us out in terms of this process. Why don't you just give us a brief description of those 6 steps?
Yeah, so my upcoming book, 10,000 Hours of Play, is what impacted my life the most, right? In 2003, I turned my life into a game first, and then everything was different. I did everything much better than otherwise because I was passionate about it. And then my first book content, which is about the Octalysis framework and these 8 core drives, only came in 2012 and beyond. So this book is about how to turn someone's life into a game. And like you said, builds in from 6 steps. So the first step is knowing the game you play in your life. What are you passionate about? What is success in your life? And so once you know what your game is, then you can build everything to align with your game. And you would actually feel like there's meaning and purpose there. The second step is knowing your attributes. So what are your talents? What are you good at? Let's say your game is to improve sustainability of the environment, right? But for your attributes, some people have better skills in quantitative skills, and some people have better skills in persuasive skills and writing skills, whatnot. So it's good to understand what your attributes are, because it leads to step 3, which is knowing your role. So again, back to that example, if you are good at quantitative skills, you can become an engineer to build sustainable machines to help the environment, clean energy. But again, if you don't have those talents, you have the persuasive writing skills, etc. Maybe you can become a diplomat to negotiate international treaties that are good for the environment, etc. So for everything game you want to play, based on your talents, you can choose a role. Just like in a game, you have the same goals of defeating the enemy, but you can choose to be a warrior or a mage or a healer or whatnot. So once you know what your role is, so that's the first 3 steps, we call it know yourself. We go into the next 3 steps, which is grow yourself. So then you understand what are the skills you need to build. As a engineer or entrepreneur or educator, what are the skills I actually need to acquire? Do I need to acquire skills in SEO, right? Or scientific writing or physics or business management? So you start to build up your skills profile so that you can become what we call the strongest player on your server for your role. And then we talk about it's good to have synergetic roles to help each other to build things that work well with each other, as opposed to you can't use two skills at the same time. Then once you know your skills, then step 5 is to build alliances. So these are the people who are playing the same game as you, but they have complementary skills and different roles. So you can work with them and get closer to the goal. And then finally, step 6 is to take on quests. And these are activities, right? Either it's a minor quest, which is taking on a challenge, doing a summer program, volunteer in Africa for a few months, whatnot. Or it's a major quest, which is taking on a career of a different path, whatnot. And it's a great way to get closer and closer towards beating the game that you're playing. It helps you grow your skills and it builds chemistry with your allies. So the goal is you want to have all these 6 steps aligned together to have what we call the OP, or overpowered life, and enjoying what's going on.
This sounds like something we'd accomplish in about 100 hours of therapy or so. So it sounds like a great way, a great vehicle or journey to get to where we want people to get to in the end. So look forward to learning more about this and reading your book and seeing how we can apply it and maybe cut down the hours of work therapy that we have to give people. One of the questions we ask all of our guests at the end is, we want to know if you could choose one word to describe the future of work, what do you think that would be?
If I choose one word for the future of work, it will be choice. AI technology is getting better and can do a lot of things that other people can do. So the concept is that it will create this idea of abundance, right? Before we were people farming with hands, and suddenly we have machinery that can farm at the rate of 500 people. And so it's not like 500 people had nothing to do now. 500 people now can go on and do other things they want, which are usually productive, which creating other industries. And so when the cost of creating value reduces, then that means it's cheap to create value and people will create even more value at a faster rate. And that results in choice. Now you can go and think about what you want to create more things, more industries, and that abundance funds what you're doing. I think with technology and lowering the cost of creating value, more people have choice about what they want to do.
That's great, Yu-kai. This has been really informative. I learned a lot about gamification, and in terms of our theme of work therapy, maybe it could be really helpful for people to get a better understanding of themselves and what drives them. You talked a lot about motivation, which is really interesting. Why don't you let our listeners know how they can learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, so the best way to look at things I'm doing is at yukaicchou.com, yukaicchou.com. And then that will show you my upcoming book, 10,000 Hours of Play, which is about turning your life into a game. My first book, Actionable Gamification, which is about applying the 8 core drives that I mentioned to make the workplace more enjoyable. And then all of my other projects.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a great pleasure meeting you and learning about your work. And I hope we get to influence a lot of people learning more about gamification.
Thank you. Likewise.
As we wrap up this episode, it's clear gamification isn't just a trend. It's a powerful tool for transforming workplace culture and driving success. Humans have a natural desire for challenge, reward, and progress. And when we lean into that, organizations can unleash untapped potential and foster a culture of continuous improvement. Whether it's through incorporating game elements into training programs, incentivizing tasks with rewards and recognition, or fostering healthy competition among teams, the possibility for gamifying the workplace are endless. As leaders and decision makers, it's really up to us to embrace this innovative approach and harness its full potential to create thriving, dynamic workplaces where employees feel engaged, motivated, and empowered to succeed. If you'd like to learn more, I've linked Yu-kai's website and his newest book in our description. Make sure to subscribe and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon for another episode of Work Therapy.